Hello and welcome to the show. Behind me is a landfill site with a difference. It's right at the heart of a community, in this case in Staffordshire. And many of the locals say that the smell from it, hydrogen sulfide, bad eggs, is actually worsening their health. A lot of people want it closed down, but would that make the smell go away? And how would you do that anyway? Also on today, campaigners take the government back to court, accusing it of having insufficient plans to reach net zero. As politicians queue up to tell farmers they're on their side, are there rumblings of discontent in rural Britain? And the secret world of sound. David Attenborough is back with a cutting-edge new series on Sky Nature. But first, residents who live close to this landfill site say it's been making their lives a misery for years. So, why is that still going on? How would you describe the smell?
Like rotten eggs.
Silverdale has a problem. To me, it smells like a stink bomb and it really hits you. Residents here say that's normal.
My baby is 16, he's taller than me, but since we've moved into the area, his asthma, which was only affecting him when he exercised, has become really out of hand.
The stench is caused by this, a landfill in an old quarry, metres away from people's homes.
It's disturbing us. Even at night, it stings our eyes. It's really smelly.
Last weekend, I just had enough. I got up Saturday morning, I got the car out of the garage, I smelt it, I thought, and it was really bad. So then we just got in the car and we drove to Shrewsbury just to get away.
The landfill is releasing a gas called hydrogen sulfide from rotting waste. Exposure can cause health issues.
We'll just check your blood pressure.
Something the local doctor says he sees in his practice.
It was the usual things you'd expect that to affect. So it was people with breathing issues like asthma or chronic bronchitis. It was people with sinus issues, almost like a hay fever type picture, and irritated eyes. We can only say from what myself and my colleagues have experienced is it has had an impact. Someone raises it every week as part of their conditions that they're coming to us with.
The company operating the landfill told us that the hydrogen sulfide emissions remain below World Health Organization guidelines and they have never been found legally liable for public health issues. The thing is, this is not an entirely new story. It's been going on for years, with some periods worse than others. The Environment Agency, which regulates the site, says emissions of hydrogen sulfide have increased again recently. So why has a solution not yet been found? On Monday, the government's waste minister visited Silverdale and came away saying no resident should have to put up with the horrendous smell from Wally's quarry. And just this week, the local council called on the Environment Agency to use its closure notice powers. We spoke to the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs to ask them why they've not sorted the issue. They sent us a statement saying they have sympathy with the issue the community is facing.
They go on to say that the Environment Agency and government are firmly committed to finding a long-term solution to the problem of odour from Wally's quarry as quickly as possible. But that is so much easier said than done.
A closure plan for a landfill, again, is a fairly complex thing. You have to cap off the site, that is put plastic and clay liners on top of the site and then soils for restoration purposes. And then again, get the balance right of the environmental control systems within the capped landfill. But the aftercare plan for a landfill site, once it has been closed, the environmental permit remains in place so long as there is any risk of pollution, and that can be literally decades.
I went to Westminster to meet the local MP, Aaron Bell, who has recently started a petition to get the landfill shut down.
What we need now is a rapid plan to get a closure notice to stop the endless stream of lorries coming into the site. That's what we need to see happen, and I'm determined that those costs should fall primarily on the operator. There is a bond, for example, but if there are additional costs, I think they should fall on the Treasury in general rather than on local residents.
Do you have a rough figure about how much it would cost to stop this place stinking?
But it could be in the order of 10 or 20 million pounds.
Wally's Quarry Limited told us,
"We have now permanently capped over a third of the site and shielded the operation from our neighbours. By the end of 2027, the entire site will be permanently capped, and we will begin our work to sensitively landscape the site into a fantastic open space in the heart of the community. We have voluntarily invested a total of well over £2 million in all of this to ensure we achieve these goals as efficiently and effectively as possible.
But residents are tired of waiting.
We're too far north. If it had been Kent or somewhere like that, it had been closed down 6 years, well, it had never got opened.
Locals and their representatives all say the smell should end soon, but given recent experience, don't hold your breath. Well, for more on this, I'm joined in Westminster by Labour's Shadow Environment Secretary, Steve Reid. Steve, you've been to Wally's Quarry. What did you think?
Well, it's shocking when you first get there. We drove there, we got out the car, and the stench immediately hits you in the face. I felt nauseous, if I'm really honest, standing outside that landfill site. It is unbelievable the extent of abandonment that people in that town feel, that the government, despite knowing what's going on, has done absolutely nothing to help.
Why do you think they have been abandoned, in your word?
Well, we've had over 10,000 complaints put in from people living in Newcastle under Lyme. 3 years ago, the Environment Agency issued an enforcement notice, but there was absolutely no follow-up on that. I just think the government has washed their hands of it and decided to do nothing. Now, if we win the election and I become the Environment Secretary, I will haul the Environment Agency into my office and I will demand answers.
You mentioned the Environment Agency, and they come up a lot, obviously, in the stories that we do, and there's a slightly common theme that they either don't have the teeth to do the job to protect our environment or they don't have the money. Would that change if Labour gets elected?
Well, we do need to look at the powers that the regulator has. If you take sewage, for instance, I don't think the powers are strong enough, and we want to look at what greater powers they can have. If you start to enforce more against companies that are polluting, and Labour believes the polluter should pay, then through the income from the fines that they would be paying, you potentially have more resources that you can use to strengthen the regulators.
But no more central government money, you're saying, for the EA, but you'd hope to recoup more money through fines?
Well, there just isn't the money around until a new government has been able to grow the economy. But we can look to enforcement to generate fine income that could then be used to increase the capacity of the regulator to regulate.
One of the big things I want to talk about in the environment, rivers. It's up there right at the top of people's concerns. Can they be cleaner under Labour? If so, how so?
The water companies have got away with this because the government's let them, to be frank. Labour will put the water companies under special measures. And there are a number of elements to that. One of them would be to ban bonuses for the water bosses who are overseeing this level of pollution. And it's illegal, remember, as well. So we would make those same bosses personally, criminally liable for law breaking that is going on. We'll also introduce mandatory and independently overseen reporting of all discharges from sewage outlets, so we know exactly what is going into our rivers and our lakes and our seas, and there will be automatic and severe fines for every illegal discharge, so that those companies are focused on clearing up the toxic filth that they are pouring into our waters.
On the wider environment question, obviously we've seen the rowback on the 28 billion that Labour were going to spend on green tech and things. For people who are concerned about the environment, what can they expect? What can you commit to under a Labour government? Will it be improved?
Well, Labour has got a much stronger green offer than we've seen at any point under any previous government, not just this Conservative government, but any previous government. And a centrepiece of that is setting up a publicly owned company called GB Energy that will direct public as well as private investment into harnessing clean energy here in the UK. That gives us not just cleaner energy, it gives us lower bills, lower energy bills for households, and it gives us new jobs right across the country that will give people the chance of a decent income.
Well, thank you so much, Steve Reid. Now, the government has been back in court this week after campaigners challenged its commitment to reduce its legally binding obligation to reduce emissions. The action centres around whether the Carbon Budget Delivery Plan provides enough detail on how the government will meet its targets. That plan itself was only published after a successful legal challenge by the same groups forced the government to do so.
Obviously, it's very frustrating for us to be back in court. Essentially, as I said at the start, a sense of déjà vu that we're here again. But it really shows that we're holding the government's feet to the fire on this. We're not just going to let them off the hook a second time because we beat them in court the first time and we've moved on to something else. No, we're going to keep pushing them.
While the government says it cannot comment on a live legal issue, it did point out that it has over-delivered on all the carbon budgets to date and is on track to meet the carbon budgets for the future.
At a time when we need to be doing more, we've seen Rishi Sunak backpedaling on key climate policies, and it's so important that we have a climate plan that is realistic, that actually gets us to net zero, and we know that there are real and significant risks associated with its key policies actually getting us there. So absolutely we need to be here today to make sure we've got a serious plan that can actually be delivered.
Ultimately, it will be up to the court to decide who's right, and their decision is expected later this year. We're off to a break now, but when we come back, why some locals in Shrewsbury are up in arms about plans to fell this 500-year-old oak tree. Welcome back to the show. Well, there was an outrage last year over the mysterious felling of a beloved sycamore tree on Hadrian's Wall. And now locals near Shrewsbury are trying to save another iconic tree from getting the chop. Here's Mickey Carroll.
This tree is causing quite the ruckus in Shrewsbury.
One councillor said it's just a bloody tree. Well, it's not a bloody tree, it's a fantastic tree.
It's an oak tree, more than 550 years old, and local boy Charles Darwin may have sat under its branches during his walks in the area. But now, its future is uncertain. It stands on the route of a 4-mile stretch of road being built by the council.
It's a symbol, you know, it's part of our heritage. Things that are 550 years old, if it was a 550-year-old house, we wouldn't dream of knocking it down to make way for a road, would we?
Some locals have been protesting against the road for years, but a petition to save the Darwin oak has touched a nerve.
This beauty is mapped on a website called the Ancient Tree Inventory. It's one of the top trees in the UK, especially after the petition's success.
The petition has now gathered more than 100,000 signatures.
It's been signed now by people from maybe 110 countries, more than half the countries on the planet have signed the petition.
The council says that for every tree it cuts down, it'll plant 6 new saplings. But saplings aren't as good as mature trees at doing things like absorbing CO2 or becoming habitats for local wildlife.
They are irreplaceable because of a host of reasons: the biodiversity, the habitat, the cultural heritage.
The thing is, Shrewsbury has a traffic problem. Its town centre is frequently jammed with cars, which the council say the new road will reduce.
The balance for making roads safer, for improving air pollution, reducing congestion, I think when you balance those up, I think possibly it comes down on the side of this road being a good thing for Shropshire and a good thing for Shrewsbury.
The road plans are already approved, but the campaigners will be hoping those plans can evolve to accommodate the Darwin oak. Mickey Carroll, Sky News.
Now, as farmers continue to protest in continental Europe, we've seen the annual gathering of their British counterparts here, the National Farmers Union Conference in Birmingham. So were there similar rumblings of discontent here? Well, I wasn't there, but our climate reporter Victoria Seabrook was. And Victoria, they also had another special guest.
Yeah, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, came at the start on Tuesday to give this big keynote political address. The farmers were pretty pleased with themselves. This was quite a coup for them. Of course, we're expecting a general election this year at some point, so there was this heightened political interest, and it's no coincidence, I think, that this was the first Prime Minister to attend since Gordon Brown in 2008.
So rural constituencies are considered a real potential battleground in the forthcoming election.
A lot of these constituencies, which traditionally are Conservative heartlands, actually some polls are showing that support is slipping away from the Tories there, and some seats which Labour would have considered pretty much a write-off before, even Labour are eyeing up support there. So it wasn't just Rishi Sunak. Steve Barclay, the Environment Secretary, was also there, and I think that's not a coincidence. They're showing the farmers some love this year.
You can trust us, because I know how important my neighbours, our farmers, all of you truly are. You help support millions of jobs, add billions to our economy, shape the landscape, but most of all, you produce the food we need. Food that is some of the best and highest quality anywhere in the world. And that's why I say to all of you and to Britain's farmers, just as I did in my very first speech in Parliament, I've got your back.
And how did the farmers respond to the compliments, to being sort of valued and almost stroked by the Prime Minister?
It did go down well. They feel like they've been a bit neglected over the last few years, and they think that Rishi Sunak gets it a bit more than Liz Truss and Boris Johnson did. And they have had a difficult few years, farmers, the energy crisis pushing up gas and fertiliser costs, labour shortages, and also climate impacts. A lot of them were hit hard by that drought that we had in the very hot summer of 2022. And then also flooding at the moment is a big issue for them. So it went down well, but the NFU president, Minette Batters, I spoke to her earlier in the week, and she did have this warning.
If we don't take food production seriously, we are going to have a lot less land and we will lose those farming businesses. All we're saying is treat it as one vital part of our national infrastructure. Don't make it the poor relation.
Well, when it comes to food security, I know that the National Farmers Union and Minette, they want an actual figure, a proportion of British food that comes from the UK.
So at the moment it's about 60% of our food that we produce here, and what she wants is for that to be set as a target, as you say, at about 60% as a minimum. So ideally it would be higher than that, but she says it shouldn't fall lower. And she says, well, we have targets for things like building homes, climate, nature, tree planting and so on, things that also compete for land with farming. So she wants the same. There was some movement on that. There was a commitment from Rishi Sunak to have a kind of food security index. It wasn't quite what they were after, and of course we don't know how much longer he will be in government.
And we introduced this piece just by commenting on how angry farmers are across parts of continental Europe. Any side of them actually taking to the streets here or deciding to leave their tractors in the barn?
Well, we have had the recent protests in Wales, and that's quite specific to proposals there from Welsh Labour to set aside a certain amount of farmland for tree planting and nature targets. That issue is quite specific to Wales. I spoke to the NFU, which represents England and Wales, about whether they've been tempted to take their tractors to the street. And whilst they are facing some of the issues as farmers in Europe and elsewhere in the world, they said that generally they think they have quite good public support and they don't want to risk that. And what they would rather do is sit round the table with politicians and try and get what they want that way, which I think is also testament to the fact that they are a pretty influential group, the NFU, even though they only represent about a third of farm businesses in England and Wales. They're very well organised, they're very vocal and quite influential, hence the interest this week.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Now, a new David Attenborough series is about to launch on Sky Nature. There will be all the usual beautiful images, but there's a slight difference in this one. It's more about sound than sight. Here's Sky's arts and entertainments reporter Bethany Manel.
We're used to the phrase never before seen, not so much never before heard. Now, world-renowned naturalist Sir David Attenborough is bringing us noises from nature never before captured on film. From mammals to birds, amphibians and fish, the secret world of sound with David Attenborough uses cutting-edge technology to explore the way animals hear and produce sound. I sat down with series producer Shamila Chowdhury to find out more. Where did the idea come from to focus on the sound? Because we're so used to visuals being king in everything, aren't we?
Absolutely. So natural history films in particular are known for their stunning visuals, as you know. But the sounds of the natural world, they often take a secondary role. So they are very often drowned out by orchestral music. And we thought we would like to let the viewers experience what the natural world really sounds like, and to place sound centre stage for the first time.
How did you decide what animals and what sounds to focus on?
So every single sound that you hear in the natural world has a function. It's evolved for a reason, and that may be to find a mate, or to help look after the young, or to hunt for prey, or to avoid being eaten. So that was sort of the breakdown of the narrative that we wanted to tell.
And talk to me about technology. You had some sort of James Bond type
gadgets involved and some quite amazing cutting edge things. So we used everything from the tiniest microphone the size of your fingernail that you could put inside a bird nest or a beehive, to super sensitive hydrophones that you can put underwater to record the faintest communications between fish. But there were also a couple of gadgets that were actually developed for industry, for the gas industry, for espionage purposes, that we thought might help us to listen in on sounds that we don't normally get to hear.
What would you say your biggest challenge when filming the show was?
The biggest challenge, without any doubt, was climate change. And it's something that we've seen creep in on us over the years. I've been, in the industry making wildlife films for over 30 years. And in the last decade or so, more and more shoots have been impacted by climate change. And that means that animals that would be predictable in their movements, say their migrations or where they would be or the time of year they'd be breeding, are not doing the usual things anymore. And it started off with 1 or 2 parts of the world or 1 or 2 shoots being affected by this, but on this particular series, every single shoot was impacted by climate change, and that made, one, filming very difficult, but secondly, it was very distressing to see the animals suffering in this new world.
One of those shoots I suspect you're talking about was in Kenya, looking at the elephants. Talk to me about that.
So we went to Amboseli National Park in Kenya to film elephants there, and the plan was to film a sequence or story about how mothers and babies communicate with each other. When we arrived, Kenya had just experienced its worst drought in 40 years. There hadn't been any rain for over a year, and it was shocking to see the ground was parched. But more importantly, the elephants were behaving very differently to before. So they had split up into tiny herds, and every night they would go out of the park to surrounding fields, farmers' fields, to try and find some food. And every morning they would walk back in to the water hole in the middle of the park. And they would walk single file, heads down, absolutely dejected, and they didn't make a single sound.
You've been working with Sir David Attenborough now for many years. He's somewhat of an institution, inspiring people all over the globe. What is he like to work with?
David is an inspiration to all of us who've worked with him. He is phenomenally knowledgeable. The depth and breadth of his knowledge is astounding. He brings a lot of passion, enthusiasm and knowledge to every project that he's involved in.
Tracking down noises normally out of reach of the human ear, this deep dive of animal behaviour puts sound centre stage, changing the way you hear the natural world outside your window for good. Bethany Manel, Sky News.
Well, that's it from me for now. Remember, you can catch up on all your environment and climate news on the Sky News website and app, or by scanning the QR code that is on your screen right now. Next week, we'll be asking if old coal mines could have a new role in our green energy future.